Welcome everybody to our Turtle and Amphibian Forum. I am Sophie Verdorn with the Scappoose Bay Watershed Council. I work with them as a watershed and GIS technician. This is a follow-up to our first Turtle and Amphibian Forum, which can be found on our YouTube channel along with all of our past forums. That being said, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube after the fact. So if you need to pop out for whatever reason, or if you want to come back and revisit this talk, it will be on our YouTube page. We will have 4 presenters today and then a Q&A portion at the very end. So please hold your questions or pop them into the chat. Our first presenter is Susan Barnes. She's a regional wildlife conservation biologist for ODFW. And her first talk is going to be on the ODFW herp species priorities in Columbia County. And give us 1 second while we get her talk going.
Why don't you just use the PDF that I emailed you?
Okay, I can do that.
Okay, thank you. Looks like we have 15 people. Great. Hi, everyone.
Right. Just let me know when to move on to your next slide.
Okay. All right. So yeah, welcome to, I guess, second annual herp forum. I'm going to be talking about ODFW's reptile and amphibian species priorities specific to Columbia County. Next slide. But before I jump into those species, I wanted to just give a brief overview of some key life history traits of our reptiles and amphibians, just so that will help us put things into context and perspective in terms of like why many of these species are at risk. So reptiles and amphibians are what we call ectotherms. They regulate their body temperature by their external environment. And this is conducive, helpful in a lot of ways, but mainly it helps them withstand periods of drought, heat, as well as cold. Our herps are also late maturing compared to other animals of small size. They're relatively late maturing, and they're also long-lived. They also have naturally high mortality rates in the juvenile age classes, the eggs, juvenile, and to subadult. So that's important to keep in mind. Many of our reptiles and amphibians have really strong site fidelities. They'll return to the same spots on the landscape year after year for either breeding or for overwintering, brumating activities, even foraging. And they have species with this strong site fidelity also have very strong movement, or even we call them migratory patterns. So often when we think of migratory species, we think of birds or big animals like deer and elk, but a lot of our herps actually are migratory in nature, as they are using both aquatic and terrestrial habitats. And most are semi-aquatic, using both aquatic and terrestrial habitats. But that said, there are species that are fully, what we would consider fully aquatic to fully terrestrial. And all these life history traits are important to keep in mind, especially for land managers, natural resource managers, because as well as researchers, because when it comes to herps, given their life history and their reproductive biology, it really makes these species vulnerable to threats, and I'll briefly review those threats. But also it makes it difficult, poses some challenging when it comes to figuring out how these species are doing over the long term. It makes the reality of having short-term data sets very not very valuable, to be honest. Given that they're long-lived species, it's important to have long-term data sets for these species to really have the information that we need to understand how they're doing, persisting over the long term, and what's causing either positive or negative trends. All right, next slide. So first, again, another key point is to, and I always like to include this with, like, why care? Like, you care, you're here, you're logged in, but the reality is, unfortunately, many people don't care, or they don't know what's going on. And if they did, they would, right? But herps are at risk and imperiled globally, regionally, and even locally. If you go online and Google, some statistics, you're going to find a range. But in a nutshell, reptiles globally are 20% of all reptiles globally, nationally, even locally, are what we would call at risk, imperiled, at risk of extinction. If you look at just turtles and a subset of reptiles, that percentage is even greater. At about 60% of all turtle species are considered at risk at extinction in the near term. We're not talking long term, we're talking near term. Amphibians, because of their physiology, are at higher risk overall. At 40% of all amphibian species are considered imperiled and at risk for extinction. And this often is related to the fact that amphibians, compared to reptiles, they have thinner skin, they're more sensitive, their eggs are unshelled compared to reptiles that have shelled eggs. So just exposure to these threats, including chemical contaminants, pushes the risk to amphibians higher. So, but again, why care? Well, amphibians and reptiles are key indicators of ecosystem health for our environment in general, but as well as public health and diversity, biodiversity, because many of these species are using both aquatic and terrestrial habitats, as I mentioned earlier. They're both predators and prey. They have a key role in nutrient transfer and the food web, and even carbon sequestration. And so all that to say is we care because they're important to biodiversity. And I've been warned not to use the word biodiversity crisis, but I'm just throwing it in there. I mean, it is kind of alarming, but they are part of what we are experiencing right now in this biodiversity crisis. Another reason why to care is they're cool. I don't have that on my slide, and I know that's not scientific, but they're beautiful. They're amazing. So in and of, everything, I mean, they're amazing creatures. So that alone, and in my opinion, is why we should care. Okay, next slide. All right, so threats. These are all the standard threats that I'm sure you're used to thinking about, but just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page as to why we know why these amphibians and reptiles are on the decline, many of them. And so the main threats, the number one is always habitat loss in both quantity and quality, and habitat fragmentation. So as urbanization, development, road building occurs, the availability of those suitable habitats becomes fragmented. And again, these are animals, many of them make relatively long distance movements for their size. And so that fragmentation is a serious threat to their persistence over time. And related to that is vehicle traffic. So this is a sad photo that I'm showing you, but this is the reality. And maybe some of you have seen this yourselves. This is a photo of a northwestern pond turtle, an adult male that was hit by a vehicle. And we know this happens for other species, snakes, amphibians. And there's even some evidence that some motorists actually will take note of our herps and deliberately run them over, snakes in particular. So that's one threat. Invasive species, both animals and plants pose a threat. Reed canary grass, for example, will make otherwise suitable areas unsuitable for turtle nesting habitat. We have introduced invasive species. I'll talk a little bit about that, which predate upon or spread disease. Some of these threats are related, but going down the list, added predation. So predation is normal. Everything has to eat, but there are some species, native species, that because of their ability to adapt more readily to our changing landscape, they're actually more abundant in numbers, and they have added predation pressure on our native herps. And I'm thinking specifically of crows and coyotes, even great horned owls, which are, again, nothing against these native predators, but dams, altered hydrology, these are things that affect both hydroperiod, hydraulics, but also movement of these critters across the landscape. Human disturbance, often unintended, whether it's from angling or boating. These often have negative impacts to our herps, causing them to, for example, again, thinking about turtles, like getting too close to a turtle will cause the turtle to bail into the water from its basking structure, costing it energy, reducing fitness. Illegal collection, trafficking. Unfortunately, that is, our herps are so much more easily illegally collected and trafficked compared to other live animals. And we have the parts of other animals that are relatively easy to traffic, but in terms of actually collecting whole animals from the wild and shipping them, because of them being ectothermic, they are more susceptible in terms of other species. Chemical pollutants, disease, pathogens, some of which of those are related to changing climate, introduced species, unknowns, and then the big climate change, drought, wildfire, flood severity, frequency. Again, all those things are normal, but with the changing climate, these are increased risks that affect our herps, and including, and some of those ways, some of those impacts relate to sex ratios, because our herps our reptiles are what we call temperature dependent sex determination. So depending on temperature of the eggs, it affects whether those embryos turn into females or males. And that all relates to recruitment, and both we need recruitment, but also adult survivorship to have sustaining populations. And then finally, public awareness, education, so important, so important. And I think most people with the right information want to do the right thing. So just a continued plug for that. And this is part of it. Next. Okay, so let's jump into the species. So priority reptiles, I'm gonna address, again, these are ODFW's priorities, and this is all linked to the State Wildlife Action Plan, which is Oregon's, it was previously known as the Oregon Conservation Strategy, but every state territory in the US has a State Wildlife Action Plan. ODFW's was recently revised and updated. We submitted it to the US Fish and Wildlife Service September 30th, the day before the shutdown. We are anticipating approval soon, but it's still, approval is pending, just to let folks know. But these priority species can all be found in the Oregon SWAP, State Wildlife Action Plan. So what are they? Okay, so reptiles. Again, specific to Columbia County. In Columbia County, there are 2 species of native turtles. So I'm going to address native species, but I'm also going to bring in some priority non-native invasive species related back to that threat of invasive species, because I'm hoping you can help me with some things. Not me, but ODFW and all of us who care about native herp conservation. So in Columbia County, Scappoose Bay watershed area, there are 2 species of native turtles, the northwestern pond turtle and the western painted turtle. And both, in parentheses there, both are what we call species of greatest conservation need, formerly called strategy species. So this is the priority ranking. So 2 out of 2, 100% of our turtles, priority. Lizards. In Columbia County, there are 3 lizard species that occur, but none of them, thankfully, are identified as species of greatest conservation need. Snakes. There are 7 species of snakes that occur in Columbia County. None are currently identified as species of greatest conservation need. So some positives. Okay, next slide. But let's dig into those 2 turtle species. A lot of people get really excited about turtles, me included, and I could talk forever about turtles, but I won't, I can't. But just wanted to give you a brief overview of turtles, not really what they need, but what their status is. So they're listed on our state sensitive species list as critical. They're classified by wildlife state law as protected, meaning it's unlawful to kill, take, move, possess, buy, sell any native turtle. And when I say possess, that means whole or in part, live or dead. As I already mentioned, both of these species are species of greatest conservation need in our SWAP. And if you look at other rankings, by various conservation entities, their rankings are consistent with this priority ranking. So NatureServe ranking is S2, which means imperiled. With our federal partners, Forest Service and BLM, they're on the federal sensitive species list. If you look at the IUCN red list, the painted turtle, even though it's globally secure, and this map here, this purple bluish color on the map shows that the full extent of this western painted turtle subspecies range. So you can see here in Oregon, we're on the fringe of the western painted turtle range, which is why we are extra concerned about it, because usually as species decline, their range contracts on the edges, either north, south, east, west. And so given that we're on the edge of the western painted turtle range, the ranking is vulnerable. And for northwestern pond turtle, it also has a vulnerable ranking. And many of you probably already know and have heard the news a few years back, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service proposed the northwestern pond turtle as threatened under the federal ESA, with that decision still pending as well. Next. Okay, so 2 species of turtles are also of concern, priorities, but not because they're native, because they're invasive. They are well established, and these are the red-eared slider and the common snapping turtle. And the slider is considered invasive actually all over the world. Unfortunately, it is well established here in Oregon, and it often co-occurs with both our native turtle species. It's classified as prohibited, which makes it unlawful to possess live, to bring into the state, to buy, to sell, but even to have is considered illegal. And it's often on our worst invaders list, not just organs, but globally. Next slide. Snapping turtle. And these species have been cited and in Columbia County, which is why I've noted them. So snapping turtles, not as widespread, thankfully, as red-eared sliders yet. We want to prevent that from happening, but they also do co-occur and use similar habitats as our native turtles. They also are categorized as prohibited. They grow very big and they will eat anything that they can fit in their mouths. Next slide. Okay, jumping to amphibians. And I know the other presenters are going to probably talk more about these amphibians, so I'm just going to go kind of more high level. I'm not really going to get into their habitat and physiology specifically, but in Columbia County, there are 10 species of salamanders that occur and 4 species of frogs and toads. Of those salamanders, some are what we call still water breeding, and there are 3 of those species. None of those are what we would call species of greatest conservation need. Flowing water breeders. Of the 3 species in Columbia County, 2 are species of greatest conservation need. Of the fully terrestrial salamanders, 4 species in the county, 1 is a species of greatest conservation need, and 2 have been identified in the revised SWAP as species of greatest information need, formerly known as data gap species. And I've highlighted these here in the pictures. Those SGINs are dun salamander and western redback salamander. So this is an opportunity where we would like more observational data and maybe some future research. But back to the SGCNs, species of greatest conservation need. So frogs and toads, still water breeders, we have 3 species in the county. 2 out of the 3 are species of greatest conservation need. Flowing water breeders, 1 out of 1. That would be the coastal tailed frog. Next. Okay, so just highlighting again what these, briefly what these salamanders are. The priority salamanders are clouded salamander. This is a fully terrestrial salamander, lives out its whole life cycle on land. Really cool. You might not ever see this salamander. I actually just had someone in Lane County report one to me. She found it under a flower pot on her property. It was so cool. And then in terms of our flowing water species, torrent salamander, Columbia torrent salamander, and that's supposed to be a Cope's giant salamander. There's an error on that slide. And John took both of those photos. Thank you, John. I'll fix that. But yes, those are our 2 priority flowing water salamander species. For toads and frogs, next slide. So the 3 priority toads and frogs are the northern red-legged frog, pictured there on the left. These 2 adult frogs were hanging out in a little muddy puddle near the Polunsky Wildlife Underpass, which I'll talk about a little later. And then we have the coastal tailed frog, which again is highly associated with flowing water, cold, clear systems, higher gradient, lays its eggs attached. Really cool. You can see that really neat vertical pupil on that top image. And males, as their name indicates, have an external sex organ. So really unique animal. And then we have the western toad, which again, really cool, beautiful species, lays its eggs in strings, and another species of greatest conservation need in the county. Next slide. Okay. I wanted to wrap up with highlighting our two non-native species, bullfrog, American bullfrog. There are different types of bullfrog, but American bullfrog, which I'm sure many of you are so familiar with, you've probably seen. They were introduced to Oregon in the early 1900s, not the 1990s, that's another typo, for the food industry. And my agency, ODFW, actually stocked them for angling opportunity, make money years ago. I can't remember when the last stocking was, maybe the 30s or 40s, but sorry. So they're well established and they're associated with most perennial waters, but I've seen them in intermittent. I've seen them, when you look at the literature, it says warm water, slow water. Well, they're pretty much everywhere, cold, flowing. They'll move across land long distances on rainy nights. And they will eat anything and everything they can fit in their mouth. The only limitation is their gape, the width of their mouth. They co-occur and usually outnumber our native herps, and they will eat anything. As this photo, another sort of rough photo, but this is the reality. This is a project that I partnered with Western Oregon University on, and here we opened up a bullfrog. I think this was even just a juvenile, a subadult bullfrog, and it had one neonate common garter snake in it. This species is classified under wildlife state law as controlled. Which means it actually can be, controlled means it can't be sold, it can't be imported in, but actually controlled means that you can collect one out of the wild and keep it in an escape-proof container indoors for the rest of its natural life. I do not recommend that, but this is the letter of the law. But it cannot, any captured bullfrogs can never be released back into the wild again. Next slide. Finally, green frog, and this is my call for help here. And thanks to John and his team of people and some other natural observers, we now know that green frogs have been found and established in Columbia County. This is not good news. But it's good that it was reported and found. So this is a species, as indicated by this map on the bottom, that is native to the East Coast, but it has been introduced to other states outside of its endemic range, including Washington. This map obviously needs to be updated to include Oregon. But the means of introduction are mainly food industry, maybe pet trade too. You can buy anything and people want weird things. So if I'm not aware of, or I do not personally know how the frog got into Oregon. I have suspicions, but the point is it's out in the wild. It's been documented reproducing successfully at one or two locations, and this is the time to act. So if any of these species, with I guess the exception of American bullfrog, if you find one, we want to get our hands on it, especially these green frogs. I would love to get hands on these individuals and do some gut analysis to start understanding what they're eating. But these green frogs are currently classified as prohibited, making it unlawful to import, buy, sell, possess live in the state of Oregon. Okay, next slide. And just wanted, before I wrap it up here, just wanted to throw out some of these resources for more information on all the species that I just mentioned very quickly, but also our other native species, which are important also for biodiversity. Every species is important, and we are concerned about what we would call the more common species. The reality is that most of those species are also on the decline. It's just that the species that I highlighted today in this presentation are the ones that we're most concerned about. But we are concerned about all native reptiles and amphibians. Go to the State Wildlife Action Plan. We expect it will be approved by the service and be posted on our website here in the next month or so. There's also, I'm sure many of you already had this field guide highlighted on the screen. And then PARC, Partners for Amphibians and Reptile Conservation, is a great resource. They have, for example, great information on habitat management guidelines, BMPs, best management practices, as well as biosecurity protocols for field researchers in particular. As we're working out in the field, we don't want to be inadvertently spreading these, potentially spreading diseases and pathogens around as we're trying to learn more about these amazing creatures. And with that, I'll wrap it up. Next slide.
Thank you so much, Susan. We're going to save all questions till the end, or put them in the chat if you think you're going to forget them. Susan will be wrapping up our presentation at the end with another topic, so you'll have a chance to ask her questions still. John, is there anything you want to talk about before I start your video?
No, just go ahead and play it right away.
All right. This next video is from John Hakim, a herpetologist of Wild Columbia and co-author of The Resilient Remnant in a Human-Altered Landscape, Amphibians and Reptiles of Columbia County, Oregon. Give me a second to share that video.
Good afternoon. My name is John Hakim, and I am the co-founder of Wild Columbia and its resident herpetologist. We're here to share with you a study we recently published called The Resilient Remnant, Amphibians and Reptiles of Columbia County, which is an attempt to do a comprehensive survey of all reptiles and amphibians across the entire county. Here's an ecoregions map of the county to give you a little bit of sort of a background for what we're doing. Everything in blue here is Coast Range ecoregion, which covers most of the county. Coming up through the middle, you have the basalt basis volcanics region. And then on either side, you have this light blue, which is the Willapa Hills subregion, which is more of a sedimentary rock basis. You can see they have very different characteristics to them. The volcanics region has the much more dramatic streams and the hard basis for the streams, whereas the Willapa Hills is more of a sedimentary rock basis, so the streams are not nearly as dramatic and have more of a gravel or dirt or clay basis to them. In the corner of the county, southeastern corner, we have the Willamette Valley. It is small, but it is quite dramatic in the herpetological differences there. And you can see a lot of it is meadow and oak and quite beautiful. We divided up the county into 100 sectors. In every one of those sectors, we tried to give at least 5 to 10 man-hours of surveying, which came out to 1,234 total hours of work. And we'll show you what we found there. So what species did we see? We came up with 27 species. 6 frog species, 9 salamanders, 4 turtles, 6 snakes, and 2 lizards. For every one of those species, we mapped out which sectors it was found in to give us sort of a little range map of where it existed across the county, so we could look at the range associations, the ecoregion associations, and that sort of thing. We have the question marks here because we believe it quite possible that there is a few more species that we haven't found. We based all these maps off of 5,064 records we compiled. About 3,700 of those records were our own unique finds, and the other 1,300 were contributed from community residents who submitted photos to us, iNaturalist records, museum records, previous surveys, any other help we could get. We tried to make sure we documented every single find anyone had made in the county. So what were some of the really cool things we found? Matt and myself both find that one of our favorite salamanders in the world is the Columbia torrent salamander. This is a salamander restricted to a very small area of southwestern Washington and northwestern Oregon. It had not previously been photo documented in the county, but other herpetologists had seen it before, so we knew it was there. We provided the first photo documented records. As you can see, it was almost purely restricted to the volcanics region. This is even a little bit of sticking out volcanics right here, whereas we did not find it within the Willapa Hills region for the most part. This is worrisome because we believe it used to range across the entire county, and our friend and fellow herpetologist Chris Rombo had found them in Prescott, Goble, Chapman, down into Scappoose Creek. So it used to exist in other places, but we attempted to replicate those findings and were unable to. That could mean that even in the last 15 or 20 years since he saw them there, that they've further restricted their range. Dr. Quinn will talk to you later about why that may have happened. Second species is a coastal tailed frog. Like the Columbia torrent salamander, the coastal tailed frog is also a Oregon Conservation Strategy species, but in our region, this one is even rarer. We only found it in 3 sectors, again restricted to this volcanics area, in very clean, clear, cold, high torrent streams. Again, a really cool species. If you haven't looked up tailed frogs before, I encourage you to look them up. We believe this species as well used to exist across the county before development, and we'll talk later about why it may have seen its range restricted. One of the rarest species we found is the Cope's giant salamander. Not only is this an Oregon Conservation Strategy species, but it is also an Orbic List 2 species, which means it is threatened or endangered in Oregon. We only found them in one locality in the volcanics region in the middle of the county. This was a range extension, not just a county record, but was 15 miles further east than they've ever been found before in the Coast Range. Previously in Oregon Coast Range, they've only been known from Clatsop, Tillamook, and a little bit into Washington County. You may look at the salamander and think it looks familiar. It's actually quite similar to the coastal giant salamander, but it has a more squared off nose. Its gills come out in bigger stalks. They don't really have as much frilliness near the base like the coastal giant does. It has a more slender body, spotted coloration instead of streaked, and its tail, which you can't fully see in this picture, has more narrow, and it does not come down to a point in the end. So those are rather subtle differences, but it's entirely its own species with its own habitat requirements. We believe these may not have been as widespread as the Columbia torrent salamander or the coastal tailed frog before, but we do think it used to be further spread in Columbia County and is now reduced to just one location. Western toad is a really neat species. We're not the first to document it in the county, but we're the first to document it in quite some time. A local landowner showed us a breeding population on the Nehalem River, which is really neat to see. Jason Clinch's team also found a population in the Cedar Creek area, and we're made aware of some other populations that may exist along the Nehalem River, but that's about it. That's pretty sad because this species used to exist out to St. Helens, Yankton. If you talk to people who were here in the 50s and the 60s, they used to see toads around all the time. In the 90s, I saw them back near Jewel, but they've seen their range reduced quite a bit. Once again, we think that may have to do with development and logging, and Dr. Quinn will get more into the specifics of that later on. Another county record we got, and the first reptile we're talking about, is the gopher snake. Sadly, as you can see, the person who found this one did kill it, but we have reports of at least 5 other sightings of people who saw them without killing them, and I found a shed skin of one here. So we have 2 different localities that we know they still exist in. This snake is a Willamette Valley specialist, so we're up at the northern end of its range. We, in fact, know of no other localities in Oregon within about 30 miles of us. It probably used to live throughout the Willamette Valley, but they're a large snake. They need quite large meadows to exist, and frankly, most of that has been built up on. So they're quite rare now in the northern Willamette Valley. Now we'll get into the introduced species. My brother-in-law took this picture of a snapping turtle up in Miger. It was there for over 10 years. You used to see it quite regularly, but it hasn't been seen since 2014, so it probably is no longer around. It's the only one we know of in the county, but we still included it in the project because they have become stable populations have been fixed in Multnomah County and Washington County. We don't want to see that here, so please do not reduce any snapping turtles. They really could become established in the region if we're not careful. An introduced species that has become established is the green frog. This is a state record. No one had ever recorded a population of green frogs in Oregon. They're native to the eastern United States. There is an invasive population in Vancouver, and now we know of this one down here in the Scappoose Bottoms. We recorded them across about 4 miles of range in a number of different localities. We've been seeing them since 2018, and so we think they're probably here to stay, although ODFW is going to look at what they can do to try to at least reduce the spread. If you want to distinguish it from a bullfrog, they have this right here, this dorsolateral fold that goes straight across the back. In a bullfrog, that dorsolateral fold bends down along the external ear. So that's the easiest difference to see. They're also so much smaller than bullfrogs. So what habitat associations did we note? As we pointed out with the stream amphibians, these are the 3 that I showed you along with the coastal giant salamander. They are very heavily restricted to that volcanics region. We do not believe that was historically true, but that is a result of development. And we'll talk about why development pushes them into that volcanics region alone and why it's so hard for them to maintain populations in the lower sedimentary rock. One species we didn't find in any of those regions is the clouded salamander, which is an old-growth forest specialist. It certainly used to live throughout the county, but it prefers much older trees of over 100 years, and there frankly isn't much of that around. We think they still could be somewhere in the county. They're awfully hard to find. They live within the bark of trees themselves, and will be on the lookout, but they've certainly been quite reduced. In terms of turtle associations, we found painted turtles to be quite common along the eastern side of the county in the Columbia River Basin, and a few records in the northern side, not quite as common there. We found them in Vernonia Lake. We don't know if that's a true native population or if they were just brought there by somebody. Unfortunately, we did not find western pond turtles. The most recent confirmed record we have for them was from the Oregon Bird Alliance, which has a record from 2014 in Vernonia. Chris Rombo told us about records he had seen, or turtles that he had seen in Deer Island, Sauvie Island, and Scappoose Bottoms back in the 2000s. We also have had citizens who have reported thinking they saw ones in Vernonia, Scappoose Creek, and up in Meagher, but we don't have any absolutely confirmed finds still. Western pond turtles are in a lot of trouble. They are Orbic List 2, threatened or endangered in Oregon, as are the painted turtles, but they're also a species of concern federally. Their range has been reducing across British Columbia, Washington, most of Oregon, and California, and they may be eventually named as an endangered species. We'd love to find them still here in the county, but even if we do find them, it seems likely the population has been heavily reduced. Finally, the Willamette Valley reptiles. Up in this northern part of the Willamette Valley, you see we're this section right here that sticks up the top. We found quite a few northern rubber boas, western yellow-bellied racers. We found just 2 populations of gopher snake and 3 populations of western skink, which are the northernmost populations of those that are known in Oregon. We did not find ringneck snakes, so Chris Rombo did see those in the 2000s, and we believe they're likely still around. We weren't able to check the spot he found them until quite recently, and we haven't found them yet, but we think there's a good chance they're still there. We did not see sharp-tailed snakes, southern alligator lizards, or western fence lizards, which get up into the northern part of the Willamette Valley, but may not reach us. We're going to be keeping an eye out for those species. So, after surveying the whole county, we wanted to look at what areas of conservation priority we found. Where did we find the highest biodiversity? Where did we find the most unique biodiversity? One of the absolute coolest places we found is the Carcass Creek Lava Creek Complex. This is an area about 5 miles east of Mist. It is absolutely beautiful, dramatic basalt canyons. There are 3 waterfalls over 100 feet tall there. You don't find anything like it in Columbia County. It's just absolutely gorgeous. This had by far the highest amphibian biodiversity we found anywhere in the county. 12 of the 13 species that live here in Columbia County are found in Carcass Creek or Lava Creek. This includes the only population in the entire county for Cope's giant salamander, one of just 3 populations of tailed frog, one of just 2 populations of western toad, and healthy populations of coastal giant salamander and Columbia torrent salamander. There's other cool species. We found the biggest population of western terrestrial garter snakes there, which is a quite rarely seen species of garter snake in our area. We found a white-footed vole, which is a species of rodent that's almost never seen anywhere. We found pygmy owls, Pacific jumping mice, lots of black bear sign. It's just a really awesome area. Now, this area's conservation status, currently, part of it is owned by the county, about 280 acres, which includes part of the northern bank of Carcass Creek and Carcass Creek Falls itself. We also found recently that 600 acres have been bought by the Columbia Land Trust, which includes probably the best older forest in that area. We're talking 50, 60-year-old forests, in some cases up to 100-year-old trees are there. So this is a really great place that's been preserved. Unfortunately, both of these areas are landlocked. There is private land all around them, used to be accessible through Weyerhaeuser, but is no longer accessible in anything but a very, very, very convoluted route to get there. We're talking we have to cross a lot of area without roads, going through canyons, and it's a complete mess to get there nowadays. So for most people, it's not realistic to get in this area anymore. That private land includes Lava Creek Falls itself now, which is now on Weyerhaeuser lease status, which means you have to have a lease to get in there, and West Fork Carcass Creek. So in the future, we think that a lot more could be done with these areas. In the 1984 Columbia County plan, we have seen the idea that both of these are scenic resources. Both Carcass Creek Falls and Lava Creek Falls are important scenic resources for the county, and the comprehensive plan suggested turning them into perhaps a trail system. We think that combined with the beautiful forests that the Columbia Land Trust has acquired, that could be a quite amazing trail, the sorts of which do not exist anywhere in Columbia County or even really anywhere close to us. You'd be able to go through older, mature forest, visit Carcass Creek Falls, Lava Creek Falls, possibly Mayfly Falls here in West Fork Carcass Creek. This might also be an ideal time to purchase it because, as you can see, it's been quite heavily logged recently. It won't be logged again. It won't be financially profitable anytime soon. So this might be a chance to get it and make something of a really unique attraction in the city that could be a place where people could really, rest in the wilderness in a way that's unlike anything else in the county. Oh, one thing I almost forgot is that Carcass Creek is also a critical resource for coho salmon, steelhead, and coastal cutthroat trout, although it has been noted that those runs have dissipated in part due to the intensive logging there. Second area we noted is Graham Creek. This was the second highest amphibian biodiversity we saw, with 10 of the 13 native species here. It included one of just 3 places we found tailed frog and our best location for Columbia torrent salamander. It's also good for salmon. It's designated critical habitat for coho salmon and was the site of an attempted reintroduction of chum salmon. Most of this is a much smaller area than Carcass Creek. There's just a little tiny canyon. We think that several little tiny canyons like this exist in the county, but they're becoming pretty sparse because of the heavy utilization of the county. So places where the habitat is this nice just aren't that common. Parts of it are owned by the Midland Water Association, but most of it is private forest land. Quite a different habitat is Deer Island Slough. This is 5.5 miles of slough on the eastern edge of the county. Again, really beautiful place, well forested. It's a fantastic migratory bird spot with lazuli buntings, bald eagles, grosbeaks, warblers, lots of waterfowl. Just really nice biodiversity. But the thing that attracted our attention were the turtles. This was the absolute best place to find turtles in the county. We were able to get onto 3 properties there with permission and saw hundreds of turtles, literally hundreds of painted turtles there. We did not find pond turtles there, but Chris Rombo had seen pond turtles there in the past, and we believe they possibly still could be there if we were able to check the properties. Most of Deer Island Slough is currently on private property. There is about 550 acres on the northwestern edge, which is owned by the Columbia Land Trust and is being managed for conservation. They recently released 37 Columbia white-tailed deer there to try to establish a white-tailed deer subpopulation. There's also been talk of it being a potential resource for juvenile salmon coming down the Columbia River as an important feeding stop. There's some people who want to open the slough back up to the Columbia River like it originally was. That's quite a controversial idea, but it's something that people have been talking about. Finally, we have the Willamette Valley regions. We have Liberty Hill and the former Boise Cascade site. These are absolutely beautiful places. You can see extensive posts and videos we've put online, including a recent post for the former Boise Cascade site, which is now known as the St. Helens Industrial Business lot. And these are basically the largest and most pristine parts of the Willamette Valley left in the northern end of the Willamette Valley. Not just nothing like it in Columbia County, but nothing like it in Northwest Oregon. We're talking 280 species of plants found in Liberty Hill, over 100 species of birds, 10 Oregon Conservation Strategy species birds. But we love these properties because of the reptile and amphibian diversity. We found 7 species of lizard and snake here, the most we've found anywhere in the county, including one of just 2 populations of gopher snake, one of just 3 actually 2 of just 3 populations of the western skink. Liberty Hill has been part of an ongoing fight to keep it from being mined and destroyed for basalt gravel. That is still an ongoing process. Boise Cascade is owned by the city. There's been talk of possibly turning it into a nature park, especially this section right here, which is really the only part of conservation value and is so covered in wetlands and running right up against Milton Creek that it wouldn't be very useful as an industrial site anyway. I encourage you to look at our recent website posts to get deeper into the biodiversity there, which is extraordinary. These are not the end of our efforts. We are going to keep looking for new finds, which we'll keep posting on our website at wildcolumbia.org. We're going to keep posting hikes and camping spots there, ongoing events that happen in the city, and events of conservation interest. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for all the help that you've given us. Over 500 people helped us on this project, including over 300 people who submitted data, scores of landowners, friends of Dalton Creek, friends of Nob Hill, friends of Liberty Hill, friends of Fox Creek were all extremely helpful. The Oregon Extension Office, the Oregon State Extension Office, just so many people came together to make this happen, and we're incredibly grateful. We think this has been a really positive community venture. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Quinn.
Okay, and I do have slides. I don't know if I'll be able to share my screen. I do not. So I did just email my slides to Sophie. Did you get those?
Yes, give me 1 second. All right, ready when you are.
Go for it. Okay. Yeah, thanks. So give me the yellow. Yep, good deal. Give me the next slide. Yeah, so I'm going to focus on the evidence and reasoning behind the study that you just saw right there, and also what our hopes are for herps in Columbia County. Next slide. Could I get the next slide? There. Yeah, so just real briefly about turtles, much has already been said. We think their distribution abundance would have been historically higher. We have reason to think that there are resident populations at Scappoose Bay and Warren, and with the highest density occurring at Deer Island there. But some of the other places that we were seeing them, we think they may simply be using those areas without actually having like established breeding populations there. And then the other thing is I've just put the introduced and potentially invasive species on the other side of the screen so you can see that overlap of habitat that folks have been talking about. Next slide. And actually the next slide, because I'm going to just dive right into our stream amphibians there. So as mentioned, they did have this contribution in the volcanic ecoregions, and I'm going to be focusing on why that is. So next slide. So I'll start with this really general question, as phrased in this incredibly simplistic and clean manner, which is the way that science will attempt to begin to address the question, is just phrase it as simplistically as possible. But next slide. The real question will turn out to be how does logging affect our particular herp species. I just highlight that because our default baseline assumption is, even though we try to address this scientifically as a really clean and simplistic question, the baseline assumption should be logging will affect herps. The question is just going to be what specifics matter. So next slide. And the question has been addressed for decades, and the plausible answer is that it's generally bad, indeed disastrous for some species, depending on particulars. So that evidence at first was kind of scattered. You have reports that there don't seem to be as many observations of herp species in places where there used to be. But what happened was we start to see some more systematic and attempts at controlled research. So you have people like Bruce Burry and Quinn going out and doing comparative work. So you can compare stream A versus stream B, where stream A has been logged and stream B has not, but they're otherwise quite comparable and similar. And look at both the occurrence of salamander species and also the abundance. And it was found that generally that, for example, torrent salamanders and tailed frogs have much lower abundance or are completely wiped out in streams that have been logged compared to similar streams that have not been. But the question turns out to be complicated in as much as there are conflicting effects that giant salamanders in some of those same streams actually turned out to be more abundant in cases where the stream had been logged versus unlogged. But next slide. There are confounding factors that were found right on top of that, right from the start. Basically, for any stream A and stream B, there's indefinitely many different ways you could compare them to each other. And then also, as Susan mentioned, the importance of short-term data versus long-term data. And of course, the frustration, there's no baseline of knowing for certainty what would have been present originally in any of these systems. So it becomes complicated to tell like which differences matter. And so with respect to the giant salamander effect I mentioned, it looks like that was actually a short-term effect, that what was happening was that when the logging happens, there's an increase in temperature in the stream, which generally is bad for the salamander species, but could be good for the prey items that the giant salamanders are preferring. And so that effect actually is a boost in the population of the giant salamanders, but one that we expect will be temporary. Next slide. So what happens over time is more and more of these types of questions have been asked, more systems are studied, and some systems studied over longer periods of time. And the overarching story, it turns out to be that there are many factors that matter, but there's a lot of interaction amongst factors. And so the particular story will be particular to individual sites. That's what I mean by specificity. So logging less frequently appears better, but that might be because of secondary factors like how much downed wood cover objects there are as opposed to the actual age of the trees. But mixed logging appears generally better than clear cutting. The proximity of roads is pretty clearly negative. All of those effects interact with features about the particular stream, like the coldness in the water. The steeper streams are usually, but not always, better, in turn, depending on larger, coarser rocks being present with harder substrates, which are usually good, but sometimes canopy cover matters, sometimes leaf litter matters. Out of all this complexity, some themes emerge. So the first is that, yes, the effects are generally bad. The specificity matters, but as well, sedimentation is pretty clearly an issue. And we know that in addition to comparative studies, comparing stream A versus stream B, but also through some long-term studies now of individual streams, but also through functional reasoning about these species and how they function, what they need. With respect to torrent salamanders, giant salamanders and tailed frogs in particular, they have a need for a substrate that has these little micro spaces that are open so that they have hiding spaces and also so that their prey species can be using those little micro spaces. But what happens is fine sediment will fill in those micro spaces. And that's actually been demonstrated in laboratory situations. But so it supports the hypothesis that fine sediment is a critical negative driver for these particular stream-associated amphibians that we're looking at. And that turns out to explain some of this mess of confounding factors. So it makes sense of the fact that there's a positive association between the salamanders and the fast-moving streams that can flush out the sediment faster with the steep grades so that there's less opportunity for sediment to build up. And also it makes sense with respect to thinking about certain types of logging. Next slide. So if you leave some trees, such as the non-commercially valuable species, then you'll still have some root masses near the stream, unlike in the photo I'm showing on the left there, that's all the trees have been removed right up to the stream. But if you leave some, then you still have some root masses retaining sediment. If you log only certain parts of the stream, but leave others, then there's less opportunity for sediment to build up throughout the whole stream. So mixed logging is better for those reasons. It also makes sense, this hypothesis of the timescale effects, that when you have logging up to the stream, there's that initial bad effect, but there can be bad effects continuing over time, especially if there's a road that is constructed in the area. The sediment runs off faster from the roads, and that effect persists over time. So, for example, one study found that sedimentation is 130 times higher on unpaved roads that remain in heavy use versus if you just have a road that's built, but then it is abandoned. Next slide. Okay, so all of that fits together as well with an emerging body of evidence that buffer zones are helpful. In other words, don't log all the way right up to the stream. Next slide. So to bring all that to our case, we were initially sort of struck and surprised that there's this tight association between these four species and the volcanic subregion in Columbia County. Next slide. So it would be unsurprising and it would make sense that we have this stacked distribution if what's going on is that these species are limited to the areas of the county that are most resistant to sedimentation. So the darker blue substrate is basalt-based, and what that means is that rock tends to stick together, and then when it does break apart, it breaks into fairly large pieces. Whereas the light blue is ancient marine sediment, and it tends to break apart more easily, and when it does, it generates that fine sediment. So our hypothesis then is that the distribution of these four species is explained by a combination of factors. There's the relatively lighter logging, less road building, and then the favorable stream conditions, including the substrate, okay, so that the harder basalt substrate. And this hypothesis does confirm some literature that the lithology matters for distribution and abundance of herps, but only in combination with logging regime in certain cases. Next slide. So here I've added Western toad to the mix because we found a similar sort of story there, that there's a strong association with fast-moving, relatively buffered sediment-resistant conditions. Also point out that the sedimentation hypothesis explains the disappearance of the torrent salamanders from the eastern part of the county. We have direct visual evidence that the streams where we did find them further west are relatively clear, whereas the streams where Rombaugh found them some years ago, those streams are no longer clear. They're heavily silted over, although in that case it's to do with residential development. Okay, next slide. So what all of this indicates is that there are some interventions that could improve the status of our herp populations in Columbia County. So the evidence is that buffer zones and mixed logging can be effectual. Importantly, those can be less economically profitable. And so for that reason, it's important to target the most effective mitigation efforts in the places where they will do the most good and where we have evidence that it will matter. And also it's important that our evidence indicates that mitigation efforts can have positive effects moving forward. So next slide. Yeah, so historically, the buffer zones were only implemented on streams that have fish, so like not including the headwaters of streams. The association there is that our salamander species that we were looking at, they need the headwater parts of the streams that have the least amount of sediment. But unfortunately, historically, those would have been the areas that did not have buffer zones and so are most vulnerable to the effects of logging without buffers. But the Forest Accord that was signed in 2021 and signed into law in 2022 and is now being implemented will require that there be buffer zones on the headwater parts of streams. And also that the buffers will be wider, which there's also literature indicating that that can be helpful for herp populations. So for Columbia County, that's important because the positive changes indicate that there's a potential for the scattered mini populations that we found to actually recover and provide a basis for more healthy population overall moving forward. Basically, these herp species, they can recover from population declines, but they're really not good about recolonizing over large distances. So if we have a stream where we have a remnant population that is hanging on in a few safe areas, like the best parts of the habitat, and you have this remnant mini population, then they can repopulate that stream, including if there's some areas of that stream that are subjected to more heavier parts of the mixed logging regime, meaning that the population as a whole will benefit from these remnants now with an enhanced ability to disperse, hopefully, under the new Forest Accord. Okay, next slide. So for example, put some meat on the bones. Graham Creek, as John mentioned, it's quite steep. So I put the topographical map, you can see that. That basically acts as an effective buffer zone. It's hard to get equipment in or trees out. So we have a thriving herp mini population there. Next slide. Oh, by the way, the darker green indicates the species richness in each sector. So you can see a similar story here at Carcass Creek, where we have relatively steep parts where we have another mini reservoir that is hanging on then. Okay, next slide. Unfortunately, as mentioned, Carcass Creek, it has been subjected to some logging and relatively recently, as we can see in these satellite photos. Including some logging on public land. So the proposal to repurpose that in order to potentially develop a trail network would serve multiple functions. It would be great for the recreational function, but as well having that area maintained together with this network of proper buffer zones can help that mini population function as part of, well, basically a resilient foundation for the recovery of the species in terms of the larger population. Okay, next slide. I'm going to shift to the Willamette Valley reptiles, where the details are quite different, but the overarching theme will be pretty similar. So next slide. We have those two beautiful remnant patches of habitat and remnant populations in terms of Liberty Hill and the former Boise Cascade property. But those snake and lizard species do require relatively large habitats. The individuals, they'll use different parts of the property at different times for different purposes. And then the species, the populations as a whole require enough numbers and gene flow to be healthy over time. But next slide. We think either actually or potentially those two properties might actually be part of a connected network that can be functioning better as a whole than either individually. I've put blue stars on screen to show records of rubber boas that were actually found within the city of St. Helens, and they're found in some pretty scrappy habitat, which is maybe really not entirely functional on its own. It could not support any sort of a population over time. But we hypothesized that these rubber boas might actually be attempting to move between more suitable areas. And so I've put in yellow is private land and brown is public land. But in each case, like scrappy, sort of somewhat usable habitat that we think you can imagine that these snakes might be moving back and forth throughout the city, but especially between our two sort of prime habitat areas of interest. So that really is, yeah, I'll mention also there's a lot of mortality probably with respect to this potential dispersal, especially at the highway, which I think Susan might have words about in a moment. But some lessons that are important about this, first of all, that interventions can be helpful, that maintaining even these scrappy pseudo-functional portions of land can be important because it's functioning as a whole. And then also that we can reconceptualize those two last remaining fragments is actually a resilient foundation working together for potentially long-term improvement in the health of the population of these species. Okay, and that is our theme. So next slide. I will thank you kindly for listening, and I guess we'll take all the questions at the end. So one more time, next slide. Oh, don't leave me. Yes. Okay. Most important slide. So yeah, don't leave me hanging. We thank everyone again. And yeah, I'll look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Aleta, for that wonderful presentation. I realized I didn't present you, so for everyone watching, that presentation came from Dr. Aleta Quinn of the University of Idaho and WAD Columbia, and the co-author of The Resilient Remnant, A Human-Altered Landscape, Amphibians and Reptiles of Columbia County, Oregon. And then our last presentation is by Susan Barnes, who's going to present on the Polinsky Wildlife Underpass. And I will share that presentation right now.
Hey, can everyone hear me? Yes, okay. All right. Nice. I was just looking to see who the participants are in this forum, and I see, and I wanted to call out Justine Brum with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife is online here, and so I am in the Clackamas office. I cover Northwestern Oregon, focusing on species of greatest conservation need. But Justine Brum, also with ODFW, works within our Willamette Wildlife Mitigation Program, and she is stationed at Sauvie Island. She focuses on projects that have been brought in through, hi Justine, thanks. Brought in through the Willamette Wildlife Mitigation Program, which is part of the mitigation program required for the EPA hydropower system. One of the projects that Justine is responsible for is the Polinsky Wildlife Area. This is a property that was brought in the 90s. So I'm going to highlight a project that we've been working on together and that's been in the works for a long time. called the Polensky Wildlife Underpass Project. And perhaps some of you have heard about it before. I'm actually going to be, plagiarizing is not the right word, but I'm going to be using a presentation created by Allison Yates, a grad student at Portland State University. And Allison graciously shared this presentation with me, and she recently gave an update on the project, gave this presentation at the Oregon TWS Wildlife Society meeting just a couple of weeks ago. So just to let you know that this is really Allison's presentation, because she is the one who's been assisting ODFW with the monitoring component or analyzing the data from the monitoring effort that is now underway at the project. Okay, so next slide. And yes, that is a northern red-legged frog dead on the road. Okay, so this is, again, giving credit to Allison Yates with PSU and her team there. Allison is currently focusing on looking at the camera images that have been collected to date that are deployed at the underpass structure to figure out how northern red-legged frogs specifically are using this new structure. So I'll be focusing in, I'll give you a little bit of history on the structure, how it came about, but I'm really going to focus on some of her preliminary results. So these are, again, preliminary results. Next slide. Okay, so the underpass, just for a little bit of context, even though it was designed primarily for the northern red-legged frog, a species of greatest conservation need, it also was designed to safely move or allow movement of small to medium-sized wildlife across Highway 30. But again, it was specifically, some of the design features were specific to this amphibian species of concern. Next slide. Okay, and I'm not going to repeat some of the stuff I said before, but the need for underpass structures has been well documented because of amphibian movements. Northern red-legged frog in particular it lays its eggs in still water systems, but it is highly terrestrial, and they make strong movements between those, what we would call breeding and non-breeding habitats. So often there are roads in between these two, not two habitat types, but these two functions that are necessary for the species to persist. And unfortunately, we have road mortality that is affecting the species. Next slide. And thankfully, when we are thinking about underpass structures, we aren't totally coming up with something new. There are some examples that have already been implemented in other parts of the world. And so when we were thinking about this underpass structure for Polensky specifically, we did look into other amphibian underpass designs that existed. Next slide. So where is this structure? I mentioned Polensky, I've mentioned Highway 30. So this is, this shows the little yellow star is Polensky Wildlife Area, northwest of Portland, technically in Multnomah County. And the middle slide shows the Polensky area, the little two yellow dots there in the middle indicate the location of the underpass structure. So on the northeast side of the structure, we have the wildlife area, which is floodplain, forest, riparian, bottomland habitat types. You can see a lot of open water. Some of those wetlands are also seasonal in nature. But then on the southwest side of the structure, is the more forested habitat. And we have ODFW documented with partners for the past 20 plus years, movements of northern red-legged frogs between these two areas, Polensky and the uplands. Next slide. So the crossing itself, a lot went into trying to decide where to put it, but basically we took existing data, ODFW and our partners, we gathered existing data, we did some additional nighttime road mortality surveys, and we mapped those data points of frogs, both dead and alive, and we identified hotspots where we found frogs moving across Highway 30 or attempting to move. And then there was this whole geotechnical analysis, feasibility studies, including with geologists, engineers, hydrologists, many people at the table to determine, okay, where is it feasible to place an underpass structure, given geology, utilities, land ownership, etc. Long list of partners and people involved in this process. And this process, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago or something, doing all the data gathering and technical feasibility work. Meantime, we were fundraising. We did have BPA, a large chunk of money from Bonneville Power Administration to go toward the project, which was wonderful. We also had other sources of money. But at that time, the amount of money, the projected cost for this structure was about, I think, $1.6 or $1.8 million. This pre-COVID. Just to let you know, it cost closer to $4 million at the end of the day. But this slide shows basically the structure itself is about 120 feet long, right under the Highway 30, which is a 4-lane, very, very heavily trafficked road, with let's see, seven light boxes. So flush with the ground boxes, graded boxes that allowed ambient light and moisture to enter the structure, and 120 feet long and about 54 inches wide was the diameter, or is the diameter of the structure. Steel pipe, concrete layer poured so it's flat, and then some natural substrate on top of that concrete. The gray lines in this image are the concrete directional walls. So an underpass is great, but it's kind of useless without directional walls of some sort to direct critters to the structure. So concrete walls were a key part of this design. You might note that the length of the wall on the northwest side is short, pretty short compared to the other lengths, and that was because of the existing topography. The ground was quite steep there, so we were not physically able, it was not possible to extend the concrete wall any farther than that location. We also ran into some cost constraints, and so some of the other walls, or one or two of the other walls, had to be shortened due to that. The blue line indicates existing stream, the Burlington Creek, and an existing culvert. So a lot went into this design, but this was the location given the data, hotspot data, and then the feasibility report. And this is where the structure was placed, and placed such that the existing stream could flow as it did, and not inundate the underpass. Next slide. So this is a view of the structure itself from what we call the uphill end. So uphill, the forested non-breeding habitat, downhill end, the Polensky breeding habitat. So this is the 54-inch culvert entrance. You can see this natural substrate there on the bottom, the concrete wall extending on both sides, and the equipment inside is the camera monitoring equipment. And we have cameras deployed at both ends of the structure. Next slide. So building an underpass is great, but we wanted to know if it was going to be used. So right away, ODFW installed these cameras to try to determine if frogs and other wildlife were using the structure. And then we partnered with PSU, Allison Yates, and then another grad student, Katie Kearney, through Kat D. Rivers' lab. And these are Allison specific questions that she's looking at. Katie is also looking at some additional questions related to red-legged frogs, but that's more related to habitat use in the uplands. So Allison's key questions are, how did northern red-legged frogs and other species interact with the crossing structure the first year post-construction? And then she also is going to be looking at temporal and environmental variables that may predict red-legged frog movement or use of the structure itself. Next slide. Oh, next slide. The point of that slide was the rest of this presentation really focuses on the first question. Yeah. Okay, so this is just another illustration of the camera setup. We have two types of cameras, basic Reconyx cameras set to, well, we've fiddled with settings over the, since deploying them, but currently they're on motion sensor settings. But this Halt 2 camera is of particular interest. This is a modified Browning camera, and it is specially developed for ectotherms and small mammals. And it is triggered, it's connected to what we call a threshold, and a LiDAR beam is projected across that threshold. And when that beam is interrupted by a critter, hopefully a frog, that triggers the Halt 2 camera to take a picture. Next slide. So here is Justine doing a camera check. And you might notice that the equipment looks a little different. We've been testing some different camera designs, or really threshold lengths. Initially, we had a shorter threshold, a 16 or 18-inch threshold, and more recently we've been operating the system with a 1 meter length threshold. Next slide. Okay, so here's just an example of some of the images that we have captured. It's really, really exciting to see that frogs and other wildlife have been using the underpass. It didn't take long. I'm not going to get into the whole review of the camera images, but basically Allison and her team of undergrad students are using time lapse. Next slide. Oh, that was a red-legged frog crossing the threshold, by the way. So a lot of images have been captured so far, and Allison and her team have been actually going manually through them, which has been a lot of work. And a subset, they've been focusing efforts on the subset of images that have animals in those images. Next slide. So some results to date. 32, this was, I think we've actually have maybe 3 or 34 different species of wildlife, including invertebrates, have been documented using the underpass. Amphibians, reptiles, mammals, even birds. We did have a feral cat, which was a bummer. We did have American bullfrog, another bummer, but for the most part, we have captured a wide variety of critters, including herps, rubber boa, northern alligator lizard. It's been really exciting. Next slide. Including 7 amphibian species. So we have duns, western redback, I already mentioned northern red-legged frog, our target species, bullfrog, Pacific tree frog, long-toed, northwestern salamander. Who am I leaving out? I think that's it. And Centina, that's the other one. Yes. Okay, next slide. So specific to red-legged frog, there have been over 2,400 unique images that have contained red-legged frog in them, with over 300 what we would call independent detections. So we can't quite figure out, if that equates to 328 individual frogs, but passages of those frogs. Next slide. Of those 328 detections, 275 were identified to age class. That picture on the left is actually one of the first photos that the camera system picked up or captured of a red-legged frog, and we can tell from that image that that is a gravid female frog, and she was moving downhill. So this image was taken on the uphill end. Unfortunately, the camera system on the downhill end did not capture this same individual. So based on the images, sometimes we can sex, which is pretty cool. Next slide. Okay, so just a few other, I'm not going to go through all of these slides. There's a bunch more. Because again, these are preliminary, but interestingly, for this site, about 35% of all northern red-legged frogs detected in year 1 of monitoring those detections occurred over a 1-week period in late March. So this was late March of 2025. So this bar graph just shows the number of red-legged frog detections, and the dark are adults and the orange are the juveniles. So that big peak in late March was when most of our detections of adult red-legged frogs occurred. But you can see that there was detections, occasionally, and then interestingly, the juvenile detections. This was one of the things that we were not expecting, was to see so many juveniles moving, especially during the summer months in June and July. Next slide. If you looked at the timing of those detections, most of the detections or most of the movement was captured between 8 p.m. and 4 a.m. Not totally surprising. Next slide. Interestingly, the movement, even though it did not differ by movement direction, did not differ by camera. Most of the movements were, what am I trying to say? Most of the cameras, or most of the frogs were detected moving uphill, and I think that's better depicted on the next slide. Maybe not. Sorry. This is where I wish Allison was here. So back to complete crossings. So again, there were some issues. We've had some issues with some cameras, but so all of those 328 red-legged frog detections, that doesn't represent complete detections, but of those we were able to detect at least 11 of those frogs making complete uphill or downhill to uphill movements. Next slide. Okay, so some major findings so far. The structure is being used by red-legged frogs during the breeding season, but also outside. So that's pretty neat to see. And again, I already mentioned the juvenile movement. Of all the age classes, I'd say we know less about juveniles. So this is likely a project for another grad student to continue helping look at these camera images and try to learn more about how red-legged frog juveniles move and the timing and the triggers for their movement. And that's a little juvenile in that photo. Moving from east to west, so that would be uphill. That's a juvenile frog moving from Polensky to non-breeding habitat. Next slide. I already mentioned this a little bit. There were some unexpected differences in directionality detected by the cameras. So over 93% of the frogs that were detected, they were moving uphill. So 93 of the detections were frogs moving uphill. Now, why is that? I didn't mention there is a slight gradient to the underpass structure itself. I think it's about 5%. So the uphill end is about 5% degrees higher than the downhill end. And so we're not sure if where the cameras are capturing more frogs, if those frogs are triggering the cameras less often on the uphill end because they're able to jump over the threshold. We do know that frogs jump over the threshold and do not trigger that camera. We were able to document that using the reconics and other methods. But also we know that the concrete walls are shorter on the uphill end. And so we suspect that's playing a role in the reason why most frogs detections seem to be from frogs moving uphill. Next slide. So in summary, lots of things are using it. It's been pretty fun to go through some of the images. Lots of bugs, slugs, like hundreds of pictures of the same slug. But it's been really neat to see how many amphibians and reptiles. I didn't mention there are common garter snakes, red-spotted garter snakes that have been documented completely using like complete passage of the structure from uphill, probably using it for foraging. There's a lot of rodent activity in there, as well as some of those invertebrates and frogs. Next slide. And I'll just leave you with another photo, a fun photo. This is a northwestern garter snake. I think it's eating a frog. I would need to zoom in on that, but that's just an example of some fun things that we've been able to document. Some interesting behavior. Next slide. Future directions. The work is continuing. Alison is wrapping up her study, so be on the lookout for that. But this is this camera setup seems to be functioning mostly well. There's definitely have been some challenges that we're still figuring out. I'm sure the technology will continue to change and improve and will adapt. But we're really hopeful that this monitoring effort for this particular structure can help inform future monitoring efforts and also help us understand the value of underpass structures and inform other underpass structures that are currently being considered along that same stretch of Highway 30. Next slide. So in the spirit of Alison, I just want to again thank Alison Yates for all of her effort and her undergrad students, her team, all the funders of this underpass project. I didn't get into the whole effort to fundraise additional money, but when costs increased, we had to pursue additional sources of money. to make it happen. And thanks to CREST, BPA, OWEB, OCRF, Oregon Wildlife Foundation. I'm probably leaving out some other funders. Well, Multnomah SWCD. It happened, and we're really excited. We had multiple partners at various stages, and we couldn't have done it. I mean, it was definitely a team effort. And it's been exciting to document success, use by red-legged frogs for full passage of the structure. And we're excited to continue monitoring efforts and learn more about the role of underpass structures on this population in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. All right, we are wrapping up. So if anyone has any questions they would like to ask our presenters, you can unmute and ask them, or if you don't want to talk, you can pop them in the chat and I will ask them for you.
Can I go?
Yes, go ahead, Caroline.
Hello, I'm with Friends of Nob Hill, and I want to thank John, Hakim, and Matt, and I think Lucas Green is perhaps working with them, but I just want to thank them for that amazing survey of herps of Columbia County and the work you're doing to identify important habitat and slowly try to. And so in regard to their program, I have a really quick question about the Columbia Land Trust property purchased right near Carcass Creek. I'm just wondering, how many acres is that?
If I recall correctly, I think it's 600 or approximately 600 acres.
That sounds like a lot to me.
Yeah, it's a good size.
I had not heard that or picked up on it. I'm thrilled. So thanks for your work, you guys. Excellent. And also I'm just so happy about the Polensky Wildlife Crossing, and I was eagerly awaiting the results from last year's program. And I have a question about that, which is, I'm just curious where the word Polensky came from, because I used to know that area as Burlington Bottoms.
Yeah.
That might be for Susan. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so yes, the property used to be called Burlington Bottoms. Polensky is it's named Polensky for J.R. Polensky. John, I don't remember his middle name. He was a BPA employee who helped, who was involved in the wildlife mitigation program. Justine, do you have anything to add on that?
That's fine.
That's about as much as I know about it too. Yeah, but it does, we sometimes refer to it by either name. Yeah, Burlington Bottoms or Polensky Wildlife Area.
I have a question about that crossing as well. I don't know if you're in a position to know this, but if other crossings were made, do you think that the cost would lessen because of the, like, maybe starting came in planning and stuff, or would it be pretty much approximately the same cost every time you tried to do something like that?
Every site is different. I think some crossings would be less, but some would be a lot more based on the geology, the technical feasibility. This particular structure was, ODOT did not allow an open cut trench method, open cut, so cutting open the highway. So the pipe was installed under, like, just using a bore machine, and that increased the cost dramatically. So, but I would not use this price tag to inform other structures.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Right. In the chat, Kat says, as a former red-legged frog catcher with the Harborton Frog Rescue, I'm very happy we have an underpass. Does anyone else have any questions before we wrap up?
Yeah, Susan, just a quick question. I think when I was speaking with LSEP at one point or another, or maybe it was Crest, that there had been ideas, nothing confirmed that was moving forward, but that there was thoughts that if this was successful, that there may be potential for other crossings along 30.
Yes, that is and that was and still is the hope. So documenting successful use by one of the target species was really important, which is why ODFW undertook this camera monitoring effort. There are other monitoring methods, but this is what we would call a passive technique. But yes, the one of the main goals is to use lessons learned from this underpass structure to help inform other underpass structures that are currently being considered. One of those being in the Harborton area. So looks like Kat mentioned she was a former Harborton Frog Shuttle volunteer. Thank you. So there's a large breeding population of red-legged frogs that lays their eggs at Harborton Wetlands, which is a mitigation site owned and managed by PGE. And those frogs make that similar migratory movement past or over Highway 30 and are assisted by the shuttle volunteers that's been going on for about 10 years. There has been some feasibility analysis of completed for an underpass structure at Harborton. More is needed. The geology at that site is actually very different than the geology at the Polensky underpass location. I should probably leave it at there.
Yeah, no, thank you. That answers my question.
Yeah. I guess one other thing I will add, there are other potential places where underpasses could be used to get red-legged frogs and other amphibians safely across these roads. There are other design options that probably, they would be less expensive. And we are looking at one on the coast right now, or exploring a possible under crossing on the Oregon coast. And that design would be what we would call an at-grade crossing structure under the road, but it's a completely different road. It's not a state highway, it's a county road, less traffic. That design option was not possible at Polensky, and it wouldn't be for Harborton either.
Yeah, I have a question. Susan, in your first presentation, you mentioned that Dunn's salamander and Western redbacks, you have, their greatest information need. So I would like to know, what do you need?
Thank you for asking. I was waiting for that question. And I might need to get back to you on that. But the first thing would be observation data. But then some other needs would be related to things that are more difficult to study, like micro habitat site selection, movement patterns, recruitment trends. So challenging things to study. And there might be more, and I'm not thinking of them right now. But I can get back to you on that. But thank you for the question.
All right. Well, if no one has any more questions, we're going to wrap up the presentation. Thank you all for coming. This presentation will be posted on YouTube in about a week, so keep your eye out for that and go check out more of our forums on our YouTube channel. Thank you, Aleta. Thank you, John. Thank you, Susan, for presenting.
Thank you for the invite. And yeah, thank you, Aleta and John. The study and the look at the habitat is just, yeah, such a great, important effort. So thank you again for doing that. And I'll loop back to you on hopefully getting some hands-on green frogs this season.
Very good. Thank you.